Hey guys, in this video we'll be having a look at the new braid from Handing, which is the Blast 8 strand, and I'll give you my feedback on its performance. Let's have a look. So I started experimenting with a couple of different braids, and I shopped around on AliExpress to try and find a braid that was very budget friendly and would perform well without breaking the bank. And at the same time, Handing offered to send me a few spools of their 8 strand braid. Now, I didn't pay for these, but I hope to give you an honest and unbiased review of what I think of this line and how it performs on the water. I generally prefer PE 0.6 line or line approximately in the 0.1 to 0.12 millimeter range. So that's exactly what they sent me. Now I did receive the 300 yard spool, which is this one, and a 150 yard spool, which is the skinnier one. 300 yard spool is the wider, slightly lower diameter one. The packaging looks quite premium. There's holographic detail on it, and it's a plastic coated cardboard, and it looks surprisingly premium for the value you get and the price you pay for this product. I'm quite surprised. Not that you're going to use the box, but it does leave you with a very good impression of the product if it's packaged well, which this is. Now, looking at the line and the line itself and the diameter, it's rated as a 0.12 millimeter. And if I compare the Handing line, and I'll give you a close-up here of the two lines compared, the Handing line does seem to be substantially thinner than other braids I do have, specifically the Lay-Done 8-strand braid as well. And another brand I'm particularly fond of using for BFS is, I don't have a spool for that one, but I do have it on the reel over here, is Shimano Kairiki braid. Also PE 0.6, which is rated for 0.12, I believe. And if I compare these two lines with the Handing braid, you'll see the Handing seems to be thinner. Now, I don't have the fancy tools to test and actually measure the line, but if I look at them, it does seem to be thinner than the other two lines. And other reviewers, specifically Peter Kim from the BFS Fishing Channel, did measure these, and they seem to come in slightly under spec. So they seem to be slightly smaller than the rating of 0.12 millimeters. Something else I will also note at this point is that the braid is very tight weave. If we look at them very closely, you'll see the Handing seems to be a very tight, compact weave, which means it'll make less noise as it goes through your guides, which I did notice, and I'm quite a big fan of. That's something I noticed on the Shimano Kairiki. It's quite a loose-ish weave, so as you handle it and tie knots, you see the strands tend to separate a little bit, which you don't see at all with Handing braid. Now, looking at the technical stuff, Handing does use what they call Hyper OSI, a coating they use on their line, and as the SI would imply, it's a silicon-based coating. Now, that coating is supposed to help with both abrasion resistance, help with smoothness as well as it passes through your guides and passes through the line guide on your reel, and it's supposed to help limit how much water the line actually absorbs while you're fishing it. So that would, in theory, decrease how much water your line is absorbing and thus the weight of your line. So that's supposed to help with casting distance because a lighter line would, in theory, cast further. Now, practically speaking, the line does feel very slick and handles very well. And that added silicone coating does also cause the line to be slightly firmer when handling, which really is kind of handy when you're doing your knots. It's not super limp, so it doesn't kind of have a mind of its own. It helps a lot when you're tying your knots and handling the line. Now, on the topic of knots, the silicone coating kind of helps with that as well, as it firms up the line just a little bit, which makes handling easier. And I'll show you two knots on screen now, both an FG, which is a 12-turn FG with a risotto finish, and an Alberto knot. Now, I tested both these knots just to see how they tied, and I'm very happy with the performance both in knot tying and handling during tying. I found that some lines can be finicky if they're too limp. It kind of makes the tying process a little bit harder, and I'm quite happy with how easily I could tie both my FG, the one I'm particularly fond of, and I tested the Alberto. It's not my knot of choice, but the Alberto was particularly easy to tie and cinched up very nicely. Now, when it comes to on-the-water performance, I spooled up 3 reels with the PE 0.6 braid. That would be the Pure Silver Feather, which is this guy. I also stuck it on a Solo King Acura, and I'm also testing the Handing Magic L Air reel. Now, I spooled this one up specifically so you can see the color difference. As you can see there, the on the right hand side there, the green is the as it is off the spool. It's that one there. And on the left hand side there, you'll see that's what the line looks like after 18 hours of use. So there was a little bit of bleaching. It definitely got lighter. But the muted green is quite handy if you want to tie braid directly to your lure, or if you want a more subtle presentation and you're not a big fan of really bright neon braids. Depending on your fishing conditions, a more muted line might be a very good idea. So this color is quite suitable for that as well. But as you can see, there's a little bit of color loss long term, but it's not the end of the world, and it's still a nice muted green. It should camouflage quite well. Now, while we discuss my opinion of the line, let's have a look at some underwater footage of me actually using it. For the price, I think Handing is a winner here. It performs very well, just as well as braid from my local tackle shop does, but it does so at a much lower price point, about 30 to possibly 40% lower than I would regularly pay for line that's the same quality and the same weave in an 8 strand. I really like this braid, and I'll be keeping it on the reels I had it on so I can do some long-term testing and hopefully report back in about 6 months on all of the braids I've tested to see how they perform in long-term abuse. Now, one thing I will note about Handing's Hyper OSI coating is that silicone does tend to want to stick to itself just a little bit. If you spool fresh line on there very tightly, it does tend to want to tack to itself a little, but that disappears the moment you put in a few casts. I'll show you on screen now. If you strip line off the spool after it's been used a little bit, it comes off smoothly and doesn't stick to itself. But if it's fresh off of the spool after it's been spooled on tightly, it does tend to want to follow the spool if you have an overrun. Now that's actually a good thing because it'll limit how much your line fluffs up if you have a major overrun at the beginning of the day. I really like this braid, and I plan on ordering some more for myself with my own money and ordering the 4-strand version for comparison. I want to try the 4-strand version for fishing structure around grass because that's something I do quite often, as the 4-strand version should, in theory, cut through the grass a little bit better. But am I happy with this? Absolutely. I'll be keeping it on the reels I have it on now for long-term performance testing, so I should be able to report back in a couple of months just to see how things went and see if it's still holding up long-term. Would I recommend this to other anglers? I definitely think so. It's available via AliExpress or via Amazon, and I think for the amount of money you pay for this, it is a solid, good performing line, and it'll do very well. Specifically for BFS fishing, I think the 0.12 or the PE 0.6 version is a solid performer, and it's a good balance for people starting out in BFS because it handles quite well, or anybody liking BFS. It's just a general, my recommendation, size-wise, for BFS. Thank you for watching this review. I hope you found it useful, I hope you found it helpful, and I hope it offered you some insight into a good, solid performing product. Have a good one.